What's a question that you have for the generations that grew up without the internet? I'll go first. How did you figure out literally anything? For example, I just cooked a turkey for Thanksgiving and I followed a recipe on the internet and they had pictures on how to carve it and told me the exact items to buy. Like every single thing about cooking the turkey, I was able to do because I had a video recipe and a whole list of ingredients from the internet. Like, how did you figure things like this out before the internet? Please help me understand.
Wow, what a fun question. I'm 50, so I think I am at the perfect age to speak about this because my first half of life was pre internet, second half, internet age. Life isn't profoundly different for me because I grew up in these 70s, 80s. I essentially say 80s because that was my teenage years, formative years. We still had air conditioning and cable television and nice cars, uh, decent technology, but we didn't have the internet as accessible, right? So I didn't really get into the internet until about the 90s. You had to rely on your brain more. When I say that, I don't think we're necessarily smarter now or we're smarter then, but we have information instantly accessible, nearly instantaneous, right? You don't have to remember who was in that movie or what that recipe was because you can just recall it every time you need. How do I bake a turkey? Da, 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 da. Oh, yeah. But back then, you kind of had to know because you couldn't wait till Christmas Eve to try to figure out how to get a turkey. Unless you called your mom. Hey, mom, how long do I bake a turkey, right? Information had to be written down a lot more. That's why you had cookbooks. People would share recipes. Things like if a concert was coming to town, you would find out because of written advertisements, flyers, billboards, magazines. If you were really into rock and roll and you want to know, you would go check out Hit Parade magazine and the other magazines, Metal Mania, and you would find out when your bands were likely to tour and such. So there was a whole lot more information, but it was just in written form. Now magazines have gone the way of the dodo, right? Because we don't need those archaic forms of information. People relied back then on the newspaper a lot more. Now, not so much. Back then, you wanted to sell something, you put an ad in the newspaper. Now, you throw an ad on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. It's easier now, but it wasn't impossible back then. You could do all those things. You just were forced to plan a little bit more. But you didn't realize you were planning because you didn't know that there was an easier way coming with the internet. But life wasn't profoundly different. But then again, I'm comparing the 2020s to the 1980s. I mean, remember, Back to the Future was a movie that was in the 1980s. Technology was abundant, but it just wasn't as profound as it is now. But if you were to ask someone that was raised during the 1930s and 40s, their answer would be decidedly different. So for me, it's not profoundly different. We had air conditioning and modern stuff, but the internet was just the icing on the cake that makes things so much better. I remember, I'll give you one little anecdote. I remember some guy at work was shooting off the mouth about how the best team in college football was. And I interjected and told him, I said, Alabama is the number 2 winningest team in regards to national championships in modern era, second only to Notre Dame. I grew up in Alabama. I know this. He got angry and embarrassed me in front of everybody at work. He's like, man, you don't know what the F you're talking about. You just effing running off at the mouth. So I shut up. I was embarrassed. Next morning, I got up, drove to the library, public library, went through the card catalog, found the atlases, sports almanacs, I should say, and found the page, printed it up, and had to bring it in and show him. I wish I would have done it in the lunchroom in front of everybody because it would have made a better story, but I just did it in private. I pulled him aside and said, hey, look, man, when I first got to work, check this out. He goes, okay, and he walks away. Wouldn't even acknowledge it was wrong or say, oh, well, I'm sorry, I snapped on you. And he was much older than me. I'm like, man, you're yelling at me. I'm like 25 years old. You're some 50-year-old dude being a jerk to me. But either way, I did go through all that just to prove him wrong. Nowadays, I could have just said, yeah, you're wrong. Look, ESPN stats, whatever. But that's pretty much the difference, right? Back in the day, you had to remember phone numbers, and you would remember them because of always punching them in manually. Nowadays, no one remembers phone numbers. You don't have to. Memorization becomes, it's work, it's laborious, right? So you don't do it if you don't have to. But life wasn't profoundly different for me, but it is much, much better. I refuse to be one of those old curmudgeons that remember things as they were, as though those were the only good times. People are like, when I was a kid, we didn't stay in the house to play video games. We went out and played kickball all day long. Well, I remember hanging out when I was a kid, getting hot, bored, sweaty, wanting to go in the house where it was air conditioned, and the parents were like, no, stay outside. And I'm like, this sucks. I don't want to be out here. If I was a kid today, I would want to be playing video games. And when I want to go play kickball, then I would go out and play kickball. I have no problem with culture changing, recreation changing with the times. I hope that I always have this attitude where I'll go with the flow and be able to appreciate culture when I'm 90 for what it is and not opine about how great it was back then. Because I remember the good from back then, but I remember the bad. And I remember the good of today, and I see the bad. Try to be fair in all these things. So I don't think life was profoundly different for me. But boy, the internet sure does make things more interesting. More dangerous sometimes, but definitely more rewarding at others. So tread cautiously. God bless. Thanks for watching.